Welcome to Strain on the Game, the podcast that reveals what it really takes to keep elite footballers performing at the highest level. I'm Stephen Warnock, former Premier League player, joined by physical performance expert Adrian Lamb. From training ground truths to the financial impact of fitness, we discuss the often overlooked challenges behind the beautiful game. Right, on today's episode, we are joined by a former England international who played for Tottenham, Charlton, Middlesbrough, Aston Villa and QPR. It's my former teammate, Luke Young, and a player who left when he met Lammy. Luke, welcome to Strain on the Game podcast. It's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me, guys. Yeah, true story. As soon as Lammy turned up, I was off, mate.
We played together for Aston Villa. I think we were also in a couple of England squads together, but Lammy joined Aston Villa under Alex McLeish, was it? I think that's right. And then, Youngie, you had a pre-season and decided enough was enough.
To be fair, I hung on for a little bit longer. I played 2 games and then I thought I can't deal with this guy anymore. And I was just got the hell out of there.
There was a queue at the door. You weren't the only one, man.
Now, Youngie, really appreciate you coming on. Our podcast is aimed at the elite in the Premier League and football and sport and what makes them the best. And you're someone who's played at the highest level, Premier League, international football. You made your Premier League debut in 1998, which seems a long time ago, Youngie. You were a pup, weren't you? But what do you remember about breaking into the first team and how that felt for you at such a young age?
Yeah, it was a strange old time at Spurs. I was in the reserves, as you'd call it back then, but we felt like we was a bit of a dead pool at the time. Like, morale was low. The first team weren't playing particularly well, but there was no sense that anyone was going to be injected into that first team and get an opportunity. And then I was playing centre back actually in the reserves for about 4 or 5 games on the bounce, and turns out that all of the first team centre backs went down injured at the same time. So I remember in training, the coach coming over, I think it was Stuart Houston, shouted over "Can we have Youngie?" And obviously I've heard it and thinking, right, I'm going over the first team here, and hadn't really trained with them much at all, maybe once or twice before. So that was on a Thursday, and then John Scales was nursing a bit of a calf injury, and if John gets through Friday morning's training, obviously I'm not going to be involved, but John goes in the warm up, and then George Graham handing the bibs out, and it's Stephen Carr, Sol Campbell, Luke Young. So from nowhere really, I got thrown into the first team. And obviously started on the Saturday away to West Ham. But I think for me, the best thing was I didn't have any time to think about it, from being in this group where everyone's moaning, God, how are we going to get out of this club to go and get an opportunity somewhere? And then the next minute, I'm starting at Upton Park.
So from a point of view, we've had psychologists on. We've had Jamil on and talked a lot about psychology, and you talked about it there, about that aspect of not having too long to think about it. Was that important to you at that stage then, not to overthink playing in the first team and not having that time to dwell on what could go wrong or how suddenly your life could change?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was definitely beneficial for me for it to have happened so quick. And even going into training on Friday, there was still an element of doubt whether John Scales would come through. And then obviously to be given the bib and to be standing next to the club captain, and a couple of days earlier, as I mentioned, I was nowhere near it. So I think it was good for me that I didn't have that kind of time. I remember telling my dad, actually, I probably knew that I was starting Friday after training. I remember my dad asking me, "What's going on? Are you starting? Because I'll get all the tickets together, I'll get all the boys together and we'll come and watch." And I remember just saying, "Oh, I'm not too sure, Dad, to be honest. It looks like John will be all right." I think I made up a bit of a lie because I just wanted to deal with it myself and get on with the game. And I didn't need any sort of faffing around with tickets and my dad saying I'll be there. And so I think, like you mentioned there, I think it was good for me that I didn't have a long period to sort of dwell on the fact that I was in the first team.
You've mentioned a few of the players there that were in and around the squad. How much help did you get from them when you were making that transition, coming in from the reserves into the first team?
I think back then we was in the same building as the first team, so they would always obviously pick on the younger lads and give you a little bit of stick. So I knew a fair few of them anyway, but I remember particularly Justin Edinburgh, God rest his soul. Um, he made you feel welcome by absolutely battering you. Do you know what I mean? Like the young lad coming up to the first team, but you had a bad touch in training, and he'll be shouting to the reserve manager, "Can we have another one? Get rid of this guy. Do you know what I mean? He ain't good enough. Where'd you find him?" And all that type of stuff. And I just loved it. Like as soon as I went over with the first team, I just thought I've got to be here. Like I can't do anything wrong here. I've got to make sure that this is where I'm going to be from now on. And being involved with those first team lads, I absolutely loved it.
So one of the things that we talk about on the podcast is the positions of footballers and where they are, and we can't not talk about a fullback when we've got two on the podcast now. So the fullback position in the modern or in the game, how have you seen it transform in the sort of the last 10, 15 years or so?
Yeah, I think it's probably transformed a couple of times. I think back in my day, say 15 years ago, predominantly your job was to stop crosses, get the better of your winger, make sure that nothing comes down your side. If there was a couple of crosses, 2 or 3 crosses coming in, you'd know about it at half time. Your manager would be berating you, saying, "Hey, get hold of him." But then it became, you had to have great stamina. You had to get up and down. You had to do both sides of the game. Whereas I didn't mind that. I was quite fit and I wouldn't mind overlapping. But the next phase that I saw was, a fullback being able to beat, the other fullback one on one, and go past people and start creating. You had to have a lot more to your game going forward. Where I think a little bit of the defensive side of the game's gone now. And it is more about what you can do on the ball and what you can do going forward. So I think if they could bring it back to a little bit of mix of both, I think that would be a bit better, because I don't see a great desire to stop crosses anymore. And I think that's probably due to the fact that a lot of the fullbacks now are sort of converted wingers, and they're in the side really to create and what they do on the ball.
Yeah, we've spoken about it quite a few times on the podcast, but the evolution of the game physically and how that evolution was based on what players were being asked to do tactically. Do you think that modern fullbacks, do you think they might be asked to be doing too much?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, you can find yourself out of position quite a lot if you're trying to bomb on and create, and then there's a transition of play, and you've got 60, 70 yards to get back in, and then you're being asked to defend one on one. I know we look at these players as robots, but there'll be some heavy legs out there, when you're going up and down for 90 minutes, and I think it's one of the roles now where you have to be supremely fit for sure. I'm not sure whether it's perhaps maybe the position where you have to be the fittest. It wouldn't be far off of it. I remember Jamie Carragher used to always say that when he had periods of playing fullback, he knew that he had to do a little bit extra to get himself sharper, as opposed to when he was playing centre back. And I think you do definitely have to have a great engine, but I feel like the players nowadays have gone to another level again. Even since I've retired, I think you can see it when they're like, I know we use the word machines, but that's what they look like.
When you watch the game now and you think of the stats that are involved in the game, do you think we rely too much on the stats? Because so often now I watch games and I see fullbacks actually getting taken off, and I think that's not come from a decision of a manager saying he needs to come off because he's not playing well. I look at it because it's almost like, and no offense, Lammy, but it's like the fitness expert behind going, is loads too much. He's going to start fatiguing. He's going to start getting injured. Would that annoy you now in the modern game if you were part of that?
Yeah, I don't. Do you know what? It would have hindered my opportunity to come through, because I think one of my traits was, keep going, keep pushing, and whether they say you're in the red zone nowadays and stuff like that. I mean, I'd have been hated to have been told, like, you're in the red zone, you're not allowed to play next week, or you're only allowed to play an hour, something like that. Some of my best performances came when, you've got to dig in, you've got to show character, and sometimes you might not be playing well, but in the 88th minute, you put a cross in and your side nick a point or something like that. So I think it would have hindered my opportunity to actually show what I was about, because a lot of the reason why I made it as high as I did and got as far as I did was because of my desire and the character that I kind of showed in tough times.
One of the things we talk about is mentality in the game, and you speak about it there. Where's your mentality come from? What drove you to reach the top and to find that something different that other players don't have? Did it come from coaching as a youngster, or was it something that was put into you by you, like you said earlier, your dad?
Do you know what? I'm not sure. I think it probably come from trying to compete at home. My brother was 6 years older than me. He went through the Tottenham academy and ended up playing for Bournemouth for like, almost 15 years, I think. So 6 years older than me in the garden, I had absolutely no chance of winning stuff, but I would give it absolutely everything. I'd end up psyching, and he'd be winding me up. There was no way I could win, but I'd end up losing the plot most days. And even at school, I remember my dad got called in and after a school match because perhaps I could do stuff that some of the other lads couldn't do around about that time. And I was like, say, hey, come on, you've got to do better. And I hated losing. I couldn't stand losing. And perhaps it just stemmed from when I was young. And it definitely was something that got me further than I perhaps should have, if that makes sense. I'm not sure my natural ability was good enough to get to the Premier League, but I just think that the desire to make it, and I love training. I didn't like the gym. Lammy probably remembers that. But if we got outside, I would have trained for hours outside on the pitch with the ball and whatever the session was outside. But yeah, I think it was maybe just ingrained in me from a young age.
One thing I do remember about you, one thing I do remember about working with you, Youngie, in the short time we did before you escaped from me, was when you were in the gym, you asked questions, but you asked proper questions. You weren't just moaning for the sake of moaning. You asked provocative questions that I was more than happy to answer. And I think when you got some sort of an answer or a reason of why you were doing what you were doing, you engaged with it and you got on with it. Do you find that your approach with coaches, you needed to have that from coaches, an understanding of why you were doing the things that you were being asked to do?
Yeah, I think so. I think I really knew what I needed for the weekend, and I had a bit of an ailment throughout my career, which was not hit, that I was always like sort of constantly trying to keep on top of. So if a fitness coach would introduce something new, like some deadlifts or something like that, I'd be questioning whether that was going to help me, or is this just sort of a general session that's getting put on for everyone, but it might not benefit me. So I kind of knew what I needed and what I wanted out of the week's training. So I could be standing in the tunnel going, right, I'm ready, let's go. And I used to, my back used to go up a little bit if there was these new age techniques that someone had brought in. And I was probably a bit of a dinosaur, but occasionally I probably didn't go about it the right way. I would probably be a bit sarcastic or maybe shout something out in the gym where I'd have been a lot more advised to just go and speak to, maybe like I did to you, Lammy.
Do you think that comes from a respect thing, though?
In what way?
Depending on who's putting on the session and then what the session is. Because I remember our time at Aston Villa, and I've said this on the podcast before, you did a lot of the warm-ups because you got so annoyed with Jim, who is the fitness coach, if you want to call him a fitness coach, that he wasn't even interested about doing the warm-up. So I think if Jim had said to do something in the gym, you'd have just been like, absolutely not. And I think that comes from a respect as to who's asking you as well.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. I think, in football, people find you out in football. So perhaps a physio's trying to check you out, and the way he holds your leg and the way he's sort of manipulating you know whether, use the word imposter, but you know whether he's good at his job or he's not good at his job. And football's got a great way of, finding people out. And it was frustrating at Aston Villa, I must admit. And with my hip, I needed probably 10 or 15 minutes more than everybody else. So I'd go out early just to make sure I got going. And once I was warm, I was fine then, but it just took me a little bit longer to get going. So I agree with what you said. It depends if you respect the person who is delivering the message that, whatever the session might be. So, yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I looked up at our time at Aston Villa, and I remember walking into the changing room when I first signed, and there was a lot of players who didn't live in the area, and a lot of players who travelled in. And I hope you don't mind me saying, but you were one of them people as well who travelled in. And I remember thinking it was a different environment in the training ground because of that. Do you ever look back on your time and think, why did I do that? Because I know I do. I look back and think, God, the amount of traveling I used to do, it wouldn't have helped me body. It wouldn't have helped me preparation. And it's arguably one of the biggest regrets in my career as to why would I put myself in a negative before I even go into a training session or a game.
Completely understand like what you're saying there, but it is really strange for me. But I felt great, honestly. Because I didn't drive. I didn't drive it. So my mate was a black cab driver. So my alarm clock would go off at 6. He'd pick me up, I don't know, 6:30. I'd go straight to Euston, get on the train, first class. I'd have a load of water, hydrate, nice bit of porridge, bit of breakfast. So before I got into training, I'm wide awake. I've had a litre and a half of fluids. I've had my food in me, and then I'd have my car at the other end at the train station in Birmingham. So I'd drive in as if, I'm living round the corner. But I felt better than if I'd only just woken up 45 minutes ago, as you sometimes do when you live around the corner. So I'd get in, and the train I'd get in made me probably one of the earliest lads as well. So if I had any sort of ailments that perhaps sometimes I couldn't be bothered to get in early to sort out, I could do that. I could go in the gym if I so wanted to. But obviously, I mentioned before that I didn't love it in there, but it gave me an opportunity to do, and I actually felt great, if I'm honest, and probably complete contrast to you as perhaps driving. I don't know.
Yeah, I used to have a driver. I used to have someone who'd drive me in every day, so it was a little bit different for me in terms of I'd be sat in the back of a car, and it was a little bit different. I'd stay over a few days a week, but I always felt like that. And I don't know whether you'd have got this as much on the train, because I know trains can be unreliable, but I never liked that anxiety of, am I going to make it in on time? Is it going to be busy on the motorway? And I'm guessing there's an element where even on the train, you're like, oh, what do I do if the train gets cancelled here? Because essentially, you probably shouldn't have lived that far away, or you shouldn't be relying on things like that. So I think that was more my big thing, was the anxiety of not making it in on time. And I had that feeling most days when I was traveling in.
Yeah, I agree with you. I had that anxiety feeling, thinking, will the train get cancelled or be delayed? And for some unknown reason, I was so lucky with them. I don't think I was late once. I really was lucky. And if that had started to happen, then I may have had to sort of have a look at it. But I did stay up every now and then off my own back, like in a hotel. We sold our house because, if you remember, Wardy, the reason why people were travelling in, to training, was we wasn't in a lot.
No.
I know we've probably exaggerated it over the years, but when we was winning games, if you played Saturday, you might be in Wednesday. So to have your whole family living somewhere where, you're not from, and your wife's got friends down south, and you're thinking about schools next, you're thinking, do you know what? Like, don't need to be up here. And I think that's what happened to a few of us. You was looking at the days that you were actually training, thinking, we're never in. And on a Friday, if you remember, even for home games, we'd stay in a hotel. So that one was ticked off anyway. So you'd go up on Friday. I'd turn up with all my stuff ready, and you'd sleep over anyway on the Friday. So luckily, the trains were never late for me. And like I mentioned earlier, I actually felt great going into training.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about some of your issues with your hip and things, but I looked at some of the stats. You played 442 games between 1998 and 2014, which is a terrific availability record and a long, successful career. What do you think you did that helped you stay available and stay playing for as long as you did?
I think I probably got lucky with sort of big injuries. I think the most I was ever out for was probably 2 or 3 months. We've done my medial in my knee, and I had just before the World Cup, actually, 2006. I did my ankle ligaments for about 3 months as well. So quite lucky with not getting big injuries. But I think I looked after myself. I like to go out and have a drink with my mates and stuff, but generally I'd go for a run on the Sunday if I did. I was always counteracting if I weren't sort of as professional as you should be at the weekend. I'd be up on a Sunday and I'd go for a run and get it all out of me. And I always made sure that I was aerobically as fit as I possibly could, because it didn't take me long to realise that that was my game, and that was how I was going to make a difference, and how I was going to stay in the team was by being as fit as I can, as sharp as I can, making tackles, getting blocks in, overlapping, all action type play. And you have to be as fit as you can to do that. So I think I was quite good at realizing, right, what do I bring to this squad? What do I bring? What's the best way of me having a long career in this game? And it was knowing what my best attributes were and making sure that I didn't let myself get out of sort of the fitness levels that you needed.
So when you say you didn't go in the gym, how did you find you'd stay fit? Like, what did you do differently that others didn't then? So if you weren't going in the gym and you weren't doing your, I don't know, your strength work and things like that because you were mindful of your hip, when you say you got as sharp and as fit as you can, was that just doing running outside and extra bits of running, making sure you were stronger that way?
Yeah. So, for instance, if I felt training had been particularly poor during the week and it was getting closer to match day, I'd either go on a treadmill and get a real good blast on the treadmill, because psychologically it made me feel better. So when I'm standing in that tunnel on Saturday morning, I'm thinking, right, you've had a good blow, you've had a good week's training, you're ready for this, let's go. And I also would get the poles and the cones, and we had a real good fitness coach at Charlton called Nick Davies. He was recently at Spurs and he's gone to Everton now. But at one stage when I first went to Charlton, you warmed up just to get warm, to jog round, just to be able to train. There was no sort of science behind it or reasoning why you was doing stuff. And then Nick came in and we started doing a lot of plyometrics, a lot of ladders, a lot of sprints, in the warm up. So actually you was getting work into you before you actually went training. It wasn't just for the sake of it. And I used to pull him after training if I felt he'd been poor, and we'd do a bit extra. And I was always, like I said to you, I always knew what I needed to feel confident going into the weekend. So if I felt training hadn't been enough, you'd probably find me on the treadmill moaning that training hadn't been good enough. And I think we all did back then. I think you didn't want to be out of the team. That was one thing that's changed now. The squads are so big. I think sometimes you see some lads on the bench and they look quite happy to travel around the country and come on here and there and play 10, 15 games a season, where I think Warney will say the same. In our day, like, I couldn't bear it when I was out of the team. Couldn't bear it. Like, nothing worse than training all week and then sitting on the bench on a Saturday. I found it horrendous. I hated it. Yeah, I think we all did. And I remember, getting injections halfway through warm-ups, going in and saying, Doc, can you inject me Achilles? It's at White Hart Lane. I did that. I actually ran off the pitch at Blackburn away during a corner for Charlton, because we had a chance of staying up, and I think it was 1-0 at the time. And obviously, I won't mention the Doc because he professionally, it wasn't a great thing to do, but he's injecting my knee like during the game, and I ran back on. Like, nowadays, the fourth official will be all over you, wouldn't he? But I think back then you done anything you could to make yourself available, because it was everything. The game at the weekend was everything.
So when you talk about that there, you talk about the game now and what it is and how you struggle in terms of squad rotation. Twofold question: would you survive in the modern game? And in terms of the player that you were, could you play in the modern game? And also, could you put up with not playing every game and be a squad player? Do you think you could adapt to that?
Probably, if I was a squad player in the Premier League, I'd probably look to go and play, even if it was Championship. Like, I'd rather play. I don't think I could travel around the country, watching first team games of football. I'd go and try and forge a career by playing games somewhere else, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting because that takes us to another question, because you turned down Liverpool for that reason, didn't you?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. One, I felt like I was going there as backup left back and right back, because I've been playing a lot at left back at Villa before you came, obviously. And I felt like I was going in there as probably two players in one. Sit on the bench, you can do left back or right back. Money was the same, years were the same. and the wife and kids had just moved back to London. So it was a little bit of a timing issue. Also, not that I didn't have respect for all the clubs I played for, I felt like I was just coming down the mountain a little bit. I felt like my body was just starting to creak. If I was 25 or 26 and Liverpool came calling, I'd have run up there. Do you know what I mean? No doubt about it. But I just wasn't sure they was going to get the player that I was 3 or 4 years ago. And looking at some of the other lads that went there at that time, it wasn't a great period for Liverpool. They struggled in the league. Lots of the new signings got a lot of stick and a lot of bad press as well for not performing. So I do sometimes maybe feel like I should have gone and should have, because, you know, when that song's playing and the atmosphere at Anfield, I do wonder what it would have been like, but no regrets. I feel like I made the right decision because I think I only played probably another 50 games. So I was coming down the hill, if you like.
You played under a number of different managers. Looking back to the type of player you were and the type of personality that you had, which managers and coaches got the best out of you? Which managers did you really respond to?
I think the ones who made it simple. I probably quite liked the ones that if you didn't play well would let you know, so you knew that that wasn't acceptable. For instance, my debut was given to me by George Graham, and then about 5 or 6 games later, we're playing Leeds at home, and I think it's about the 88th minute, and Alan Smith rolls me, shoots through my legs, bottom corner, 2-1 win for Leeds or something like that. So we go into the changing rooms, and there's silence in there, and George Graham walks in, and he says, Luke, and I'm thinking, oh, right, it's the first thing he said. He's gone, you got to learn, son. You got to learn. And then it just went silent for ages. And I feel like that was kind of it. That was like the team talk because it hit me so hard. But that made me realise that, right, you can never, ever get rolled again like that. You can't let that happen. This feeling that you're feeling now, you can't let that happen again. And I probably quite like the harsher managers that, as long as I felt it was fair, would just tell you straight. And if you was training well and you was doing what he wanted, you'd stay in the side. It was very simple.
Do you feel like that came out as in you as a player then? Because when I think of you in the changing room, I think you were very similar to that as well. I think you were very honest with people. If people needed telling, and some people could take it, some people couldn't. I always look at you, Youngie, as very similar to me. I had high expectations of everyone and wanted the same standards from everyone. And when people didn't reach them standards or sort of want to reach them standards, it really frustrated me. And I think that comes from probably previous managers and coaches that I'd worked with where, like you say there, who were honest, who were brutal with you. And I think a lot of people are getting away from that now. I think when you look at the modern game, it's very much players are mollycoddled far too much.
Yeah, and I think even in the youth system, I feel like they're not really producing them for men's football. I feel like you can get sort of, oh, well done, mate, you're doing well, and that's all right in under 18 football, and then you might make a mistake and nothing gets said, and then suddenly you're in the under 21s, it's the same. It feels the same. It just feels like a continuation of youth football. And then suddenly they're thrown into this like men's football where, you know, points are on the line, people need to pay their mortgages, etc. And managers aren't taking any rubbish anymore. And it's almost like they can't deal with it, and they've had no sort of progression to understand what it takes. So, and I as I mentioned earlier, it took me everything I had to get to the level I got to. So I would never understand why a player wouldn't be applying himself to his absolute maximum. But some players, the Mavericks of this world, you can understand, and you let that go a little bit. But there were other players that probably could have been playing higher or at the top clubs in the Premier League, but had just decided to take their foot off the pedal a little bit, which I never understood.
And we'll talk about the nutrition side of things. Do you think, or how much did you look into nutrition? How much did you see it as a part of the game? And did you understand how you were fueling yourself? Because I look back on mine now, on my career, and think I was just eating what everyone thought you should eat, as in you'd have a bowl of pasta the night before a game, you thought it was carb loading, you thought you were doing the right things. I look at it and think, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. Did you look into that side of things, or was it just you were naturally fit anyway and you could eat and drink when you want? And the reason I say that is, I don't know whether you'll remember this, and it was one of the biggest mistakes I made. The Carabao Cup final when we played Man United, we went down a couple of days before, and I remember Dunny was having a bottle of Coke like a few days before with his meal. And I remember thinking, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And I couldn't, because I knew it was like one of the worst things that I could do to myself was putting that inside me a couple of days before. And you've mentioned it a few times there where you've gone, on a Saturday when I'm in the tunnel, if I can tick off all the things, then I knew I've done the right thing. I remember standing in that tunnel thinking, shouldn't have had that bottle of Coke.
Yeah, the old psychological comes back to haunt you in the tunnel, doesn't it?
Massively.
Totally uneducated, Warney. Like totally uneducated. I would probably weren't eating terribly, but there's no way that I knew how to fuel my body to its best potential. So it'd be chicken and pasta on a Friday night, but every Saturday, especially if I was at home traveling into the game, I'd have beans on toast. Beans on toast. I mean, that can't be great, can it? Do you know what I mean? But I'm thinking, yeah, I've had my beans on toast, great. Probably good that I didn't know what I should have been eating, because again, you might be standing in the tunnel thinking, oh, you can't have beans on toast, mate. Do you know what I mean? That ain't good enough.
Yeah.
But back then, I don't think that we had enough education on it. But also, once you became a senior pro, sometimes a nutritionist or Lammy might open his mouth in a meeting, and you're not interested, are you? By the time you've set you're set in your ways, it's very hard to get out of that sort of routine that you're used to, because I quite like to match day routine as well. So that would be the beans on toast, travel to the game. I would do my tie ups, my tubey grip, all that, get everything prepared for the game. It's almost like a match day routine that I followed. You know, I'm not superstitious or anything, but just letting you know it's match day and it's the day that means the most.
Yeah, I think on that one, I mean, certainly from being a coach, the established players like yourself and Warner, you would know which battles to fight and which to leave alone, and understand what could make a difference and what might not make a difference. So you tend to focus a little bit more on the younger players. But then there are the players where your door's always open, isn't it? And then you come in and you forget the knock on the door and say, I'm not really sure, Lammy, whether or not I should be having this beans on toast. What do you think? And there, you've got to be careful. But then you get top players like yourself and influential players within the dressing room can really help you drive a lot of the things you're trying to implement with the younger players. So it's a 6-2-3 situation, you've done it. But Warney, why were you following what Dunny was doing? I do not know.
I know, what a bad mistake that was. How stupid is that of me to think, oh yeah, I'll follow it. Dunny was his own man. I mean, the man who never had a massage, did he? Never wanted to have a massage. And I know, Youngie, you were the same. You'd be on that massage bed as often as you could, trying to make sure that you'd be looked after properly and things like that. But one of the other things we wanted to talk about, Youngie, was the analysis side of the game. We've just recently had an analyst on the podcast. It's not being released yet, but what we want to talk about is how much information you liked to receive and how much you actually went looking for yourself if you were going up against a winger and perhaps you didn't know them that well.
Yeah, I quite like a video of who I'm playing against more than anything, because I think it used to be a lot more like it was an individual battle back then. So it was the fullback against the winger. It's perhaps a little bit different now. There's a lot more tactics in the game and ways of playing and formation. So you've got to know when your winger's popping in that maybe the midfield player will pick him up, and it's not down to you because the fullback's coming. So it's always good to know what the opposition may do. And I don't like getting bogged down with information. I never obviously enjoyed shape in training. It's standing there. It's so unrealistic. I don't feel like it ever gave me an understanding of what they might do, because it was like a load of mannequins said, yeah, they might go here, they might go there, but you couldn't even visualize what the scenario was. And often you'd get the lads who weren't playing would be the other team, and they're messing about as well. So I think you can overdo it with the analysis side of things, and sometimes if the results aren't great as well, you can end up sort of losing the squad a little bit. But there's definitely a place for it, and I think throughout my career, I was probably didn't have enough tactical sort of knowledge put into me from a team point of view, if that makes sense. So lots of my managers were a little bit about desire, win your battles, turn them early, make sure you start fast. It was these types of messages that we got. It wasn't sort of this sort of tactical masterpiece that Pep and the likes can put together.
In terms of that, win your battles. What was the toughest type of winger that you've found? Which opposition did you have real tough battles against?
It'd probably be like a really unpredictable winger that he doesn't know what he's going to do. Maybe a Sean Wright Phillips type or a Doku now. Where he's not quite sure which way he's going to go yet until he squares you up. And I think anyone with real pace, like electrified pace, are the ones that fullbacks don't love unless you can match them stride for stride. So, I wasn't slow, but I wasn't like super quick. I was quick enough to get a slide in on a winger, but I would say it's probably the electrifying sort of pace would be the one that scares defenders.
I'll give you an example of this. So we played Spurs away and we played against Gareth Bale. And Youngie put in probably one of the best fullback performances I have seen, because Gareth Bale at the time was getting linked with everyone in Real Madrid. And it was that time when he just scored the hat-trick in the San Siro. And I think it was just after that, Youngie, that we played them. Or it might have been before. But anyway, he was in a rich vein of form. He was on fire. Youngie didn't give him a sniff. Had him in his pocket all night. And I remember coming off and everyone was like, he hasn't had a sniff. He hasn't touched the ball. Like, what was your thought process going into a game against someone like him, who is ridiculously quick, Youngie?
It's the same as any game, but you just know that if he gets a bit of space, then you're gonna have to give yourself a couple more yards. If you're playing against someone like that, Aaron Lennon, the same Walcott, you've got to understand that if it's a straight race, you ain't winning it. So you end up giving yourself a little bit more. But when I was playing against people like Gareth Bale and maybe Aaron Lennon and these types, when a midfield player would look up to pass it to him, I'd always try and threaten it to try and put the midfield player off. So try and starve them of the ball by not letting them get it, and the midfield player may turn out and go the other way. So I'd always be threatening it as if to say, go on and play it, but I might win that. The only worry then is that you might get played in behind you and your centre back. So it was always a bit of cat and mouse sort of game, but I would try and not let them get the ball in the first place.
Do you think that was the best game you've ever played?
Do you know what, Warner? When you're mentioning it, I can't really even remember it. I think, did we win 1-0 or something?
I think we did, yeah. But I honestly, all I remember from that game was your performance, and just
Thanks,
thinking,
mate. Appreciate that.
It was ridiculous. And I remember coming off, and it was, I'm sure it was like Ginge, and we were just like, how well did Youngie play there? Like, unbelievable. I remember like sitting on the bus or however we got home, just thinking, he's just absolutely starved. And I'd go as far to say I think he was the best player on the planet at the time, the most dangerous. I thought he was incredible at the time. And he went on to obviously go to Real Madrid and do massive things. But at that time, he almost felt unplayable, where you couldn't stop him and no one had answers to him. Whereas you did. And I was like, wow, what a performance. And the thing is, coming from a fullback as well, who at times you get roasted, don't you? And you think, oh God, I was so happy he was on your side.
If it makes everyone out there feel better, I went there a few years later with Queen's Park Rangers. Felt like I'd done all right, but he scored 2 and we got battered. So he got his own, mate. Don't worry about that.
Oh God. The one, oh, go on, Lammy.
I was going to ask. We talk about all the different clubs that you. How did expectations? How do you find expectations differ between the different clubs that you played for?
Yeah, that's a good question, that, Lammy, because obviously at Spurs, my hometown was predominantly Spurs. All my dad's mates were Spurs. They were season ticket holders, didn't miss a game, and I'd come through the youth team. So I felt a pressure to perform because all of my family are Spurs as well. So friends, my dad's friends, everyone around it. So I felt that pressure to perform at Spurs. And obviously, when I was in the side, we were sort of mid-table-ish, which isn't good enough for Tottenham Hotspur, you know. So there was a pressure that we needed to perform better, and perhaps we was a bit too inconsistent at the time. And obviously, similarly at Villa, the chairman had spent a lot of money, and I think Warney would be testament to this. The objective was to try and get Champions League football. So I actually remember when I first signed, I turned up with a bit of a fire strain, got through the first training session, and then about a week later, because there was a Europa League game first, and they played Nicky Shorey, they played one of the new signings. Cut a long story short, anyway, I barely had a pre-season, so I'm not at it. And like I mentioned earlier, I knew I needed to be super fit and on it to perform. And I had a couple of sort of averagey, not great games, and the manager pulled me in. And he said, you know, I need more from you, this. And I said, yeah. I said, Gaffer, like, I'm living out of a suitcase. I said, just give me a bit of time. And he shouted back at me straight away. He went, I haven't got time. And I was like, all right, at least I understood it then, you know. And he's right, because you lose 2 or 3 games or you draw 2 games on the trot. If you're trying to get Champions League, you can find yourself falling away. So expectation at Villa was, you know, we haven't got time here. You better liven up and quick, otherwise you won't be playing. Whereas obviously at Charlton, Middlesbrough and Queen's Park Rangers, the remit was try and stay up as quickly as you could, you know. And often at Charlton, we'd give it everything. But come around March, April time, we had nothing left, and we'd barely pick up a point in the last sort of 7, 8 games. So expectation was completely different at, you know, those 2 clubs compared to the other 3.
Yeah, one of the things we talk about on the podcast a lot is psychology. And do you think now, if you were to have your career again, would you use a psychologist? And would you buy into that, or is it something that you would just never think of using? Because personally, I like a psychologist. I think it's a big part of the game. I think the psychology of approaching games, approaching players is a huge part of the game.
Yeah, I mean, if everyone was doing it, and I mean, it was frowned upon a little bit when it was already back in our time. I don't know why, but
Yeah.
you know, you might find out that someone's using a psychologist. You might get a bit of friendly banter and a bit of stick. Oh, you know, he can't handle it. Or if you might think, if the manager found out that he thinks that you're not mentally right for the weekend's game, and you're never quite sure whether you trust if it's someone at the club as well. You know, whether it get back to the manager, oh, by the way, Ward going through a bit of a tough time, or you know, Youngie, I'm not sure you should play in this weekend, and find yourself dropped. You might be thinking, is he going back and telling the manager? So I think I would have found it a benefit. It's quite a lot of times when you're in poor form, and the only way I saw myself getting out of that was to get your boots on Monday and get a real good sweat on, and just get back on the training pitch and hope that your next performance was better. But there's definitely it's definitely a long, tough journey playing in the Premier League, isn't it? You know, there's lots of ups and downs, and I think that's one bit of advice is you can't get too high when things are going well, and you certainly try not to get too low when they're not.
Yeah, but the other thing we wanted to touch on was your international career. Capped 7 times by England. Obviously, an amazing honour, because I've had that myself. I've got my cap behind me there on the wall, one of them anyway. How did you find it going into the squad? Did you think it was going to be easy? Did you think that you'd fit in? Did you think you were good enough?
I felt nervous when I was 25. I probably felt like the boat had sailed, if you like, because a lot of the younger lads that are in the under-21s with me had already been capped and were kind of regular in the squad. So I was nervous going into it, but I knew quite a lot of them anyway. But they were more the fringe boys, the younger boys. But obviously, I'd never been on the training pitch with the Gerrards and the Lampards and the Beckhams and the whoever else, you know, the Terrys and the Ferdinands and stuff like this. So, but once training started up, I always felt like I was quite a good trainer because I put like good effort in. I got tight. I made sure I was doing everything properly. So after a few training sessions, I thought, you know what, you're all right here. You belong here, and just make sure that you're doing everything right. So I was definitely the most nervous I've ever been, and also coming from Charlton and not a bigger club, for some reason you feel like they might be looking at you thinking, well, he might not be in the next squad anyway. So like, you felt like you might be a bit of a bit part player. So you're just trying to do the best you can and try and, I think, probably gain the respect of the lads in training as quick as you can.
How did the intensity of training and of the games in international football compare to the Premier League?
Do you know what? I only started 5 games for England, and I didn't find it much different, if I'm honest. I think I was so concentrating on trying to play well that I don't think I was trying to evaluate how quick it was compared. And I got caught up in just make sure you do well, because back in that days, it was, the press were on players, and someone from Charlton, I felt the pressure to perform and not to make a mistake and to do okay. And I think that kind of took over. And I think a lot of the lads in the starting 11 and in the squad felt the same way. It was almost like a burden. Oh, if I'm starting tomorrow for England, and I hope I do all right, because if not, the press are going to, have a field day. And I think there was a big feeling like that within the squad. So I'm not sure whether it was quicker, slower. I can't really remember, if I'm honest, Labby, but I just remember probably being the most nervous and most concentrated I'd ever been in my career.
And one of them would be, what do you think about the modern game? Do you enjoy watching football, or do you think it's got a bit boring?
So I'll probably choose what game to watch now. So if it's Newcastle, Aston Villa, I'll watch that, because I know it's going to be two teams having a right go at each other. If it's a big team against a littler side that might camp out on the edge of their box, I don't enjoy watching that. So I tend to have a look at the fixtures and decide whether I want to watch it based on what I've previously seen from the team. So I know that fans up and down the country now are getting a little bit bored and tired of it as well. They're paying probably thousands throughout a season to go and watch their side home and away, and to get this sort of regurgitate the ball round the back and slow tempo. And obviously in our day it was a lot more high tempo, and every time you got the ball you would try and make something happen and score a goal. So yeah, it definitely is a little bit more boring than it used to be, and I do pick and choose the games that I watch now.
So if you were to balance everything off, Youngie, the support you would get now, and the sports science support and all of the coaching and all of that, versus what you had when you were playing, which era would you rather be playing in? Would you rather be playing now, or are you happy that you played when you played?
I'm happy I played when I played. I think probably too many voices now, too much faff, if you like. You look at when teams are warming up now, there's more staff on the pitch than there is players. And I think you remember, Lammy, like, I was quite structured in what I wanted, and I felt like people were interfering with what I needed to get to Saturday, and trying to make me do something that I didn't feel was good for my body. Everyone's so individual, but if I respected someone, I'd probably go to you and say, I could do a little bit of this. Do you mind coming out after training? And people would probably earn my respect, and I'd learn that they can add value to my game. So I'd probably pick and choose who I felt would be valuable to help me for the weekend's game. But yeah, I'm not sure about all this. He's overloaded. He can't do this and he can't do that, and pull him out of training. That drove me crazy.
What advice would you give to anyone trying to be an aspiring sports person?
I think maximize what your attributes are. For me, it was stamina and getting up and down and going that extra yard. And I realized that quite early, that I could perhaps make a career out of doing that, So if you can get a good grasp of what your attributes are and maximize those, I think that's important. I think there's a lot of young players that don't quite know what their strengths are. And I feel like that benefited me the most was knowing why I'm in a side. What can I do that others can't, and that can keep me in the starting 11, if you like. And I think also, I think I said it earlier, football's got a funny way of punching you in the face when you think you're doing well, and you can't get too high. You've always got to be concentrated, and especially as a defender, I used to think that, like, from the first whistle to the last whistle, you can't switch off, because if you let your man go in the 88th minute and they score, that will affect your mentality going into your next game, and it can roll on. So I used to try not to make mistakes. I wouldn't go out there and play safe, but throughout my career, I didn't make a lot of glaring mistakes. And when you're watching football now, there's so many like mistakes at the back that you're like, that would have drove me crazy. I'd have felt like I had a really bad season if I'd have gave away 2 goals maybe. So I think don't get too high, and obviously try not to get too low, which is hard to do because it's a stressful industry.
Brilliant. Good way to end the podcast. Youngie, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Enjoyed it.
Follow us on social media and YouTube at Strain on the Game. Subscribe, like, and follow.